So the next speaker is Dr. Scott Steele from University of Rochester. He's going to present on the consortium efforts about the regulatory science core competencies to guide education and training pathways.
As the slides come out, just thanks, Anil, and thank you for the organizers for the invitation to participate in this panel. And this is my first CLINAM conference, so it's been really a great opportunity for me. So thank you again. So what I'll be discussing today is just a quick overview of some work really from a number of institutions that have formed this working group to develop regulatory science competencies to guide training and education in this area. So when we talk about some of the educational programs, I think it's helpful to just provide some definitions. So for the work of our group in developing competencies and training programs, we've really used the FDA's, our FDA's definition of regulatory science. So as you know, that's the science of developing new tools, methods, approaches to assess the safety, efficacy, performance of FDA-regulated products. So as we, and one of the previous speakers had the translational research or medical product development simplified pipeline, as you think across this pathway from basic research to drug discovery or medical device development through clinical trials, manufacturing, post-marketing, even looking at health outcomes work, regulatory science can certainly drive new research questions, development of new tools, which we've heard about quite a bit over the last 3 days throughout that process. As opposed to regulatory affairs, where there's a number of well-established programs in education at different levels that are really focused on compliance with existing statutes and regulations, whether it's around good laboratory practice, good manufacturing, human subject safety issues. So just briefly, FDA has put out a number of strategic plans and defined some priorities that the agency has, which obviously the academic institutions are very interested in trying to respond to. And some of the research priority areas certainly align with much of what we've talked about the last few days, whether around improved approaches for toxicology to personalized medicine, adaptive clinical trial designs, and broadly to be in a position to evaluate new emerging technologies, whether it's nanomedicine focused or 3D printing or new imaging technologies. And there's been a number of collaborations between the FDA and our National Institutes of Health at a strategic level, but also through funding some specific projects aligned to those research priority areas. And I won't go into much detail, but Frank yesterday gave quite a bit of background on the Centers of Excellence in Regulatory Science Innovation, or CERCIs, that the FDA has been developing and expanding to a network of institutions, not only to address some of those research priority areas, but also education and training and scientific exchange. And part of our group is really focused on trying to leverage another consortium of institutions that have some shared expertise and capacity, and that is the NIH Clinical and Translational Science Award consortium. So this is 60 plus institutions across the US that support research in clinical and translational science. They have education and training programs in that area, and also are focused on building an infrastructure to support clinical and translational research. And when you look at some of the priorities, there's really a natural complementary between that, particularly in the education and training area. So to move to the training piece, through some of the FDA strategic plans and our Institute of Medicine and other studies have really focused on some of the gaps and opportunities in regulatory science training. And one of the major ones that was identified a couple of years ago was the lack of core competencies for regulatory science. So beyond the definition, what does it mean to have a training in regulatory science, and how do you define that? What are the knowledge, skills, abilities you would expect a trainee to develop through that program, and then how you could evaluate that capability. Some of the training pathways can be unclear, or incentives to work on these types of areas. The incentives may be lacking. And then the idea of both the academic networks, which can have some challenges in sharing information and coursework, but also to develop more of these university industry partnerships or public-private partnerships. So in 2013, a group of CTSAs, those Clinical and Translational Science awardee institutions, along with the initial Centers of Excellence in Regulatory Science at Georgetown University, Maryland, about 15 of us had formed, along with partnering with FDA, the NIH, and some other organizations to look at how we could partner to advance regulatory science through research, but particularly education and training. And a number of us had either just recently developed regulatory science, more formal programs, or were in the process of thinking about how to leverage some of our existing programs to address these regulatory science needs. And so that's an area we really decided to focus on initially. So we set off to develop a couple of year process to define these competencies, and a number of us had previously worked on something similar for developing clinical and translational research competencies. So a number of the CTSAs have master's or Ph.D. programs in clinical and translational science, and so we use that general framework as we set out to develop competencies for regulatory science. So with that framework, we started within our group to develop these broad core thematic areas, define the knowledge, skills, and abilities we thought were critical, start bringing in other academic institutions, industry, and some of the federal agencies to get additional feedback on these. And then similar, we did a survey to an even broader group of organizations as a next step to evaluate what we had developed, other competencies that should be included, and more general type of expertise that they thought would be critical for this. And one important is that the group, and including from feedback from others, really envisioned the regulatory science training as a complement for an individual, that they would already come in with an existing expertise, advanced degree, or for someone later career, maybe an active research program in one of these key technical areas or others, whether it's in biomedical engineering or toxicology, physics, pharmacology, some of the areas particularly of interest to FDA, food safety, medical countermeasures development. But this regulatory science piece would really complement that, not a substitute for a key area of expertise here. So as a final step, after getting the feedback from the survey, we then held a workshop partnering Jonah Dama and myself from the University of Rochester, Aaron Wilhelm from the Georgetown University CERSI, and then Eileen Cannon from the Pharma Foundation, as the nonprofit arm of pharma, was very interested in supporting education and training and to get that industry perspective. We partnered with them and held a workshop with about 40 leaders from those different sectors to do a final review of the competencies, but also explore these broader issues of career paths and developing curriculum and case studies that could support this. So these are the broad areas, and I won't go into each of these. The broad core thematic areas that were developed, and for each of these there's 3 to 12 specific competencies that define those knowledge, skills, abilities that would be as a template for training, from regulatory science policy and regulatory affairs issues to medical device development, drug discovery. Research ethics was a critical issue, data and reproducibility of research results, post-marketing compliance, and we particularly had some feedback from FDA on some of these competencies. Analytical approaches and tools was a broad area of statistics and data science approaches. Communication, which wasn't already in some of the partners' programs, from scientific communication to risk-based communication in other areas. And then technology and innovation. This included technology commercialization to some of the economic and reimbursement issues to more global issues around technology development. So the full set of competencies, as well as some of the other items that were discussed, the needs assessment for regulatory science training was included in this final publication in Clinical and Translational Science from the workshop. So one of the other pieces I just wanted to briefly highlight in our model regulatory science professional that came up throughout the survey, but also particularly in the discussions at the workshop when we had a kind of a needs assessment panel from industry, from NIH, FDA, was the idea to complement and this has come up a little bit in the discussion already, to complement the formal training and coursework with ideally providing trainees an opportunity to have a experiential opportunity, hands-on experience, perhaps through co-mentorship, but ideally at the company for a brief period, as well as a experience in a regulatory agency as well. And that was felt as a critical component to these programs as we develop them. So what we're in the process of doing as individual institutions, as well as this broader work group, is to now do some mapping of what courses, case studies, training opportunities that have been established, some online modules against the core thematic areas. And so a couple of institutions have already done this. They've developed their master's or certificate programs, which I'll highlight. And of course, the ultimate goal is to then make these available, see where there's gaps, and we've started developing some case studies where we think there's gaps in certain training materials for particular drugs or products that have come through that we can use as an example, and then make that available to all the partner institutions and publicly. So I just want to highlight a few examples of programs from members of our work group. First, the two CERCES, Georgetown has created a concentration, a track, if you will, within their existing Masters of Clinical and Translational Science, so as their regulatory science program. University of Maryland has a very successful, primarily online-based program, and sometimes they get different audiences for these programs, so that one is particularly popular among people in industry who are adding on that advanced degree. The University of Pennsylvania has a newer program, and they've really fully integrated this idea of trainees would come in with an advanced degree. So they have a regulatory affairs program, and then they have a master's in regulatory science, and for that they would require students to have a Ph.D. or M.D. or other advanced degree, and then pursue the master's in regulatory science. And for us at the University of Rochester, we've taken a slightly different approach. We've created a certificate program in regulatory science. So it is a state-accredited program, similar to a master's, but fewer courses, and has a little more flexibility on the duration of time you take to complete it. And I'll just highlight it briefly. So we did, as the University of Pennsylvania did as well, we use the core competencies to map what courses do we have existing, where do we need to develop some new courses. And so we've used that to develop some new courses in areas around regulatory affairs and technology development. We have a requirement for ethics and research course, experimental therapeutics areas, and then there's an opportunity for an elective course. And then we've integrated experiential opportunities and co-mentorship from those from industry in developing the program. So just to sum up, we're continuing to disseminate the competencies now beyond our CTSA consortium and the CERCES, but broader to other academic institutions as a template, a guide really, as they develop programs, and also helpful as we begin to make our coursework more available and share these across institutions. Obviously, we don't all have expertise in all these areas, and it really doesn't make sense for us all to create very similar programs. So where we can share courses, and we've done this with University of Pennsylvania, where we can accept credit from some of their courses as part of our certificate. Continue to build these experiential training opportunities with regulatory agencies, with industry, and try to make that a core part of the program, and to utilize this broader consortium of academic institutions, and also working with groups like the Pharma Foundation as well as individual companies in the process. And continue, of course, the core competencies aren't static. Those will continue to be updated, and particularly continue to get feedback from the regulatory agencies and industry to ensure we're addressing what the needs are. So with that, I will stop there. Thank you again.
You showed these different courses where you get competencies. How many, for instance, in the certificates, in drug discovery, or probably even more, would be principles of epidemiology.
Epidemiology.
Yeah, okay.
Epy's
Yeah,
good.
epidemio.
That's what we do. Just call it epi.
Okay, I cannot say the word today. Okay, I mean, this would be interesting to know. How far is this? Do you have 100, 500, 200 who have done this course?
Oh, how
Or
many
is it-
students have taken the course?
Yeah, or is it just starting? How
No.
many MDs did a further education in regulatory?
So these courses, there's one new course, but most of these are long-standing existing courses that are part of other degree programs. And so part of this also is we would expect most PhDs or MDs in our programs have already taken a couple of these courses. So adding the rest to create a certificate is pretty easy. But most of the courses are long-standing, and we have evaluations, feedback from those. But certainly for new courses, we'll have to closely monitor that. And that's the other issue for most institutions. To create a brand new program and a set of 6 or 12 new courses is challenging. So.
Scott, can you speak a little bit to the opportunities between the institutions to exchange those courses? In particular, as you know, with the CERSI program, one of the desires and what we are trying to incentivize, in a sense, is the opportunity to form a network of interchangeable coursework, at least across the CERSIs and certainly within the CTSA educational and training network. What are the opportunities and what are the challenges as you see it right now for the US? And further, how can we expand that internationally? I mean, we have a European NCL.
Right.
Will we have the opportunity to have European linked in education and training?
That's the goal. Yeah, there's certainly even more. I knew there was challenges, but there's certainly more than I even appreciated. So with existing courses, with credit, with tuition reimbursement, there's a number of challenges. We've worked out some of those, with example for the University of Pennsylvania, so there are ways to work them out. The biggest opportunity I see is as we find gaps, if we develop courses together, we can address those from the very beginning, whether it's formal courses, whether it's online. The case studies have been an example we're working with other institutions to develop. Obviously, there's FDA coursework, NIH coursework, which we can give as credit bearing part of our formal programs. And then I think we can do the same internationally. So it's more of a challenge with some of the existing courses versus some of the new ones where we're able to, I think, build that in. And then where to put all of the content. But we've talked about that, so that's a challenge too.